to view the meeting may continue to do so on ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of this agenda. Obviously, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. Thank you all for joining us. So nice to see some real faces in the audience as well this evening. So good evening and welcome. My only comment I have is just to mention that yesterday Peter and I held the first of our coffee sessions with the community, and I wanted to thank those members of the community who joined us and participated in the conversation. We will be holding several of these throughout the year. We'll send out reminders before they happen. We are going to start with most of them being virtual. It seems like we get really good attendance. It makes it a lot easier for people to attend from where they're at. And we'll be splitting these between morning sessions and evening sessions so that we can be as accessible to everyone as possible. One of the questions that was actually more of a comment from that session was one of the parents wanted to recognize that so many of our teachers and staff are doing a great job in helping our students and everybody in the community readjust to being back in person into sort of our forced new normal. And you know, the question they asked was, what can we do to help, and what can we do to recognize that? And you know, my comment was just to say thank you, and so I want to take this opportunity now to really pass on a big thank you to all of our teachers, our staff, our administrators, our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers, our custodians, our ground staff, everybody in the district who has done an amazing job to help make this transition back into full-time school and learning a success and as smooth and easy for our students as possible. So thank you to everyone. All right, public participation. So as per our policy BEDH, we will open the floor to public participation. Anyone in the room who would like to speak for up to 3 minutes on an item that is not on tonight's agenda is welcome to come to the mic. If there's something that you want to speak to that is on the agenda, we'll ask that you wait until we get to that agenda item. Same story there. Please come up to the mic or raise your hand and wait for me to recognize you. So anybody who wishes to make some public comments now, please do so. Wonderful. Peter, Superintendent update.
All right, so we are continuing to seek job applicants for, in particular, bus driver and cafeteria staff. We ended up, I want to update you because we ended up creating an incentive package to recruit and retain staff in that area. So we have increased salaries for those positions. We also have added signing and referral bonuses. Oh, actually, we had those in place for bus drivers. And then we also added retention bonuses for both bus drivers and cafeteria staff. We're paying $1,000 twice this year. So $1,000 in December and then again in June. These are really critical positions for us to be able to have in the district. And so we want to make sure that we can continue to recruit people into them. So we're going to send this information out to families along with links to the flyers that we have. And we're doing a real campaign to try and get word out that we're actively hiring, and that's the critical need for us is in those two areas. Mascot screening subcommittee. So last week we sent information to families and to the broader community. And the towns were very helpful to us in also agreeing to send that information out in order to be able to solicit members for our mascot subcommittee. We're currently collecting the information from community members interested in participating on the committee. Community members who are interested in applying to serve can do so via a survey link that we sent out and will include again in tomorrow's communication. The survey for community member participation closes this Sunday, which is October 24th. At the same time, we're establishing membership on the district level committee. High school and junior high school are finalizing their student and staff participation and are preparing to begin in the next week or two. Just some updates around COVID. So the last 7-day average for COVID-19 cases in Massachusetts rose slightly from about 970 to 1355. However, that number is still lower than the high we saw on September 13th of about 1,890 cases. Locally, the 14-day average incidence rate, as reported by the state, is currently 11.1 for Acton. That's slightly up from 2 weeks ago, and 12.7 for Boxborough, which is significantly down. And just as a reminder, Boxborough is subject to much higher fluctuations because of the small population in the community. In our schools, over the last 2 weeks, we've seen 11 positive cases of COVID-19 among students and staff, and so that's a total of 44 cases on the year. We do continue to publish the website that has a detailed breakdown by school, by week. We're actively working with town health departments to plan a vaccination clinic for children ages 5 to 11, and the great news is we have now received a word that we can begin to order vaccines for that age. In anticipation of FDA approval. We believe that FDA approval for the vaccines is going to come in the first week of November, or very close to that. And we're going to communicate with families as soon as we have plans for a vaccination clinic, but we are going to be doing that as soon as possible. COVID testing program update. I'm very, very pleased to report that as of this week, all of our elementary schools are now fully up and running with our pooled testing programs. DESE has called them, Don? Safety checks, that's right, pooled testing. But we are now fully up and running in all of our elementary schools. I really would just want to, again, extend a huge thanks to Assistant Superintendent Don Bentley, 2 of our nursing coordinators, Joanne Chadwick and Diane Spring, as well as all of our nurses for getting that program up and running despite some really challenging conditions early on. I also want to thank all of our staff, because staff at the elementary schools do support the program every week. And I know that's just something else that we're asking our teachers and staff to do. So thank you to everyone. I want to give you an update around equity in special education. As we had anticipated last spring, we did receive a finding from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education with regard to the identification of African American and Black students with communication disabilities. We shared our concerns with you about that last spring, and if you remember when we were talking about the MTSS proposal, this was one of the pieces of data that we anticipated we would have a problem with. That proved to be accurate. That was one of several reasons why we wanted to develop an MTSS program, but I only want to say it's one of several reasons. You know, we will be required to do a number of things as part of that finding. One is to review and, if appropriate, revise and publicly communicate those revisions of policies, practices, and procedures. We're also, and this is budget impact, reserve 15% of IDEA funds for comprehensive coordinated early intervening services to address factors contributing to this significant disproportionality. And funds have to be used for students in ages 3 through grade 12 for students with or without disabilities. So that is a significant amount of money. I think that's probably going to be somewhere in the $200,000 range that we're talking about is going to have to be used from the existing IDEA grant. We will also have to identify and address factors that may be contributing to the significant disproportionality and submit action plans to DESE in spring of 2022. So we will continue to receive information with DESE about that. We're going to do a lot of planning as we go through the course of the year, and we'll continue to keep you updated about what we're working on with that. And then I just want to echo Adam's comments about the community coffee. It was great to see about 30 families represented there. We continue to send out the dates. Every 2 weeks, we send out all of our dates for the year so people can put it on their calendars, and then we try to send a link out to it about the night before. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
Evelyn.
Do we know, Peter, what is causing that disproportionality amongst kids of color?
So this was something, you know, and Jen is new with us, but Debbie Dixon last year went to a number of DESE-sponsored workshops on this topic. And as part of that, she and some of her team did kind of a root cause analysis for that. They came back to that the system we had for providing support pre-referral and pre-special education was not sufficient to meet the needs of students. And so, you know, I think really looking at that and examining how bias along the way can contribute to that. I know another area that we've watched is students who might be English learners who might get identified with communication disabilities as well. You know, so it's something that, you know, there's no 100% scientific way to get to exactly what's causing it, but we think it's really about the pre-referral process and what our instructional support teams are doing and how they're identifying students and kind of the process used along the way.
Any other questions? No.
I would actually, just before I end on that, Don or Deb, any other, or Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. but we were just talking about that earlier tonight. Okay, so I was accurate on that, thank you. I was looking for the validation as much as anything.
Great, thank you, Peter. All right, on to our guests and presentations for this evening. First up is the Special Education Parent Advisory Council. I would like to welcome the ABCPAC co-chairs, Amanda Bailey, Abe Gutierrez, and Kara Lafferty. Come on up. And I'll ask at least one of you to grab that microphone so we can hear you. Pull hard.
Thank you very much.
Starting to go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here tonight. Kara Lafferty.
Abe Gutierrez.
And I'm Amanda Bailey.
And I'll just ask you guys, the only speakers that comes out of are very far away, and with your masks on, it's really hard to hear, so if you could make sure you speak up, it'll be helpful for us. Thank you.
Yes.
To ensure the understanding on respect, support, and the appropriate education of all children in our community, being the Special Education Parent Advisory Council, this does also highlight it focuses on students with disabilities to be addressed as well. Thank you. Officers. All right. To expand on SEPAC's role, we have both an advisory and a participatory role, working in collaboration with both the district and the school committee, advising on the matters pertaining the education and safety of children with disabilities, as well as working with administrators and the administration to participate in the planning, development, and the evaluation of special education programs within the district. And this is something where it's a collaboration where the focus is the best interest of children with disabilities. To highlight the priorities of this year, 2021-2022, we are in relationship building with the new administrators, including Jen Truslow, addressing and removing of barriers, the gathering of feedback and recommendations based thereof, continued advocacy for dyslexia on the dyslexia recommendations, and the monitoring of experiences, family experiences, including the returning to school and pandemic recovery, which, as we all know, has impacted everyone. And we'll expand a bit more on each of these on the following slides as well. For relationship building, we have met with Jen Truslow, the new Director of Special Education, over the summer, and we've also been meeting on a regular basis with monthly leadership meetings. We were also present for the Acton Boxborough Family Network Kindergarten Social, where it served as an opportunity to field some questions from parents in regards to SEPAC and how we can be of service. And we also have the Friends of the 501c3 is resuming family events, where I believe the upcoming one is on the 27th of October. And we've also connected with local SEPAC leaders as over the summer to share resources and plan for the year, because the ABCPAC is also part of the CASE Collaborative, which is the Concord Area Special Education Collaborative. So it includes other districts, surrounding districts such as Maynard, Concord, Littleton. So we're not a standalone SEPAC. We are in communication with others as well. We do have some upcoming listening sessions. We just had the most recent one on the 18th for elementary. There's a second elementary education listening session that's hosted by the Director of Special Education and SEPAC as well. And these are, let's see, the remaining ones are for a little later this month, and each listening session is dedicated to a particular grade section for children.
Thank you, Abe. Participants are welcome to attend any of those. We would welcome you to come as well and just listen to families. It was very validating, I think, for caregivers to be able to talk to one another and hear the same challenges and hear the same opportunities and good things that were happening too. It also allowed us to get some ideas about how we can meet people's needs. So the first objective for the year is a standing one. As Abe was saying, we do have some objectives and priorities that are going to be in place for a while. We continue to hold online meetings and roll call votes. We've been working to expand our outreach to better engage racially and culturally diverse families of children with disabilities. We've had requests for information in Chinese from our SEPAC meetings and offers to help with that, which has been lovely. We did an interview with Acton in Focus to introduce the SEPAC and share special education resources in a different medium versus print. And we've also forged a connection with the District DEI Family Advisory Group. One of their co-chairs has been attending our meetings, and it's been really great to find common ground and start to hear some of the same themes that come up. We're also providing mentorship if desired for leadership positions. Some of this is just being transparent about why we do things a certain way. So instead of just talking at people, talking about why we talk about the district goals and why we include these things on our agenda. There's also an opportunity to participate for the Federation for Children with Special Needs has a parent leadership development program. And even if we don't participate as a district, we can still send free agents, if you will. So we have the opportunity to get formal training for folks if they want to become parent leaders, if they so choose. Let's see. So the big focus for the year, a lot of these are sort of ongoing projects or ongoing focuses for us, was to talk about inclusion for students placed in substantially separate programs. This came up in a very passionate conversation at the end of last year, where parents shared some very raw feelings about how they experienced their children's life in the school. And these are things like, my child leaves through the back door. Well, everyone else is dismissed at the front. And all the parents are over here, and I'm waiting over here. Simple things like that really, really have an impact. And there were some good ideas that were just generated on the spot in that conversation. But to give a little bit of background on this, under special education law, students with disabilities are to be educated with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate. This is called the least restrictive environment. Now, there's sometimes a myth that least restrictive environment is individual for each kid. Least restrictive environment is that gen ed classroom with the non-disabled peers. Everything else is a question of what's appropriate for a given student. And that does vary. The district has done a lot of stuff around co-teaching, which is one way to address this access to the least restrictive environment, particularly for students who would otherwise go to learning centers for pullout. And one of the goals, of course, is to extend the co-teaching. We also note, though, that when we're talking about aligning programs, that those are segregated settings. So we're talking about inclusion and segregation. This is the continuum. Least restrictive is on the left, all the way to home hospital or residential facility on the right. The students that we're talking about with this population, typically in the green, in that setting, and then pushing in to the gen ed. What we've heard from families informally is there are varying experiences with placement decisions and inclusion support. So for some families coming in from the early childhood program, for instance, conversations start with, well, we have a program in this building that will fit your child's needs, versus here are your child's needs, here are the goals, here are the services, here's the placement. And as a result, we sometimes start from that segregated setting and then push in. You can go for circle time, you can go for art, versus what can you do in gen ed and when do we need to pull you back out? Again, this is through conversations with families. We don't have data on this, we have experiences. And we're hoping that they'll emerge more through the conversations, through our survey, and through conversations with Jen. The other thing that we see is when this happens also when kids move from school to school. So as we look at all of this, it's really thinking about what is meaningful inclusion so that students aren't guests in the classroom, that if they're being pushed in for art and music, do those specialists have inclusion training? Are they part of those classrooms or are they the paras in the back? So it's not just about universal design, but it's also educating people around disability and what that means. And it's also about normalizing it for everyone, including the other children in the classroom. So there's a lot of rich stuff here that we're hoping to explore this year and come back with a list of recommendations like we did for dyslexia. Speaking of, we're going to continue to monitor this, the recommendations that we made to you in June 2020. The district has continued its work. We are glad to see the district goals around early screening. We do still hear from families around support for student in mid to late elementary, particularly around appropriate goals and making sure services are provided with fidelity or offered with fidelity. Again, we're going to hope to get formal things to bring back to you, not just anecdotes, but I think that there are people in the room who understand and have heard this from folks as well. So we're going to continue to look at that. Monitoring families' experiences, again, we've been doing feedback forms throughout the pandemic. We did one upon the closure before school started last year and before school started this year in order to hear from families about what they were worried about, what were their concerns, and how could we support them. So this year, we had a quick one in August. We got 130 responses from parents of students with IEPs and 504s. This really helped us actually identify gaps in outreach. So we got to see which schools we got a big response rate from and where we had holes. So when we do our survey, we know where we need to focus to reach out more. The key takeaways were that people didn't know who to contact coming into the coming school year. 50% of them didn't know who to reach out to. And then we had a lot of energy and anxiety and nowhere to go with it. And people were on vacation too. So it was really nice to get the communication map and to see the outreach from the coordinators. There was also a very strong desire to connect with other families. The upshot of all of this is that we will be proceeding with our survey. We're in the process of writing those questions now. This was shelved again last year's because there was no bandwidth for it, honestly. But now that we have more folks involved, we're going to be firing that up in the next month or so. These are our meeting dates for the year, the rest of our meeting dates, and as well as information for families about where to go for COVID support. And we thank deeply the new Director of Special Education, Jen Truslow, the Superintendent, and yourselves for your time and collaboration. And welcome your questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Questions? Ginny?
Thank you for that. There's so much there. But with respect to the least restrictive environment, what do you see as the major barrier? Because I feel like we've been hearing this for years. And, you know, it's frustrating to keep hearing it. So I'm wondering, what do you see as the major barriers to move forward into, you know, instead of pushing them in for specials, to assume they're going to be in and just say, what do we need to pull them out for? Well, how do we flip that script?
It's not just us. I'll start there. It's society. It's a big, big thing, and I would love for either one of you to take up that one if you're comfortable.
Yeah, so, and strictly speaking from personal experiences with my children, the approach as to how the services were being offered, it was more of a previous district, not here. It was almost like everything was set prior to getting to know the child that these services were for. It was more of, this is what we are offering or not offering. So if you were looking for option A is no longer available, you're going to have to go with option B. Then kind of almost mold the student to the available services as opposed to the opposite. So it is the, again, from prior experience, the approach and sort of the, I'll own saying the mindset to a point of how to address the needs of the child, as opposed to any, you know, available resources or anything that's kind of really secondary to that.
And we're doing that work. We're doing that work all along. And it's really important to honor that and respect that and cherish that we're doing that work. I think it's also a matter of education. You know, a lot of the stuff around MTSS and the DCAP, and we're giving general educators more tools, but we're still talking about a high-level population, a population with high-level needs. And what does meaningful inclusion look like? And how are we making sure that those needs are met in a collaborative way, that they are part of the school environment, and that all the adults in the building understand and prioritize that. So I think it's a lot of awareness, as Abe was saying, and a mindset. Also training, a lot of training, professional development, ongoing. And we have been doing a lot of work around that. I'm not dismissing. We have. It's just, is it happening on the ground? What is happening for kids right now? And there's also a pandemic. We have kids who are responding in extreme ways to the pandemic, who have not been in classrooms. And so it's, in many cases, triage on a day-to-day basis. But we need long-term solutions, too.
If I can just add to that, you just mentioned the pandemic at the end, but that's a really good concrete example. So we did a significant amount of professional development with our staff in the year and two prior to the pandemic, and had really expanded the number of co-taught classrooms across the district. And then when the pandemic hit, it really limited our ability to put multiple people in a classroom, multiple educators in the same room, have kids coming in and out at different times. And all of the guidance around health and safety we received is you can't be mixing cohorts. You have to have kids in the areas. And it set us back, basically 2 years again. And the challenge is, as you learn the skills needed to really do co-teaching well, and co-teaching truly has to be a partnership between the special ed and general educator, and you shouldn't know which person is which if it's done well. But those skills are practiced skills and learned skills, and if you don't do them for a year, you kind of are starting over again. So I know we're really looking at doing another round of professional learning, trying to expand more co-taught classrooms, but it's a slow process too. And I think in some ways, by design, you have to be a little bit slow and intentional about it, because co-teaching done poorly is going to do a disservice to kids. Co-teaching done well, where teachers have time to develop the skills, they have time to plan together, they have time to learn how each other works, that's where you actually see improvements for student learning. But done poorly, you're going to have a negative impact on it. So we need to be thoughtful and just really methodical about how we go about it. But we definitely got set back by 2 years.
Agreed. And I think that as we emerge through this, it's going to be, let's do it mindfully and with our heads up and have those conversations about how it can be moving forward. So thank you for the question.
John?
In terms of the written materials that are provided to parents, in the special education process, do you think that those materials are written in a way that most parents are able to use those to help advocate for their children?
Do you want to have a conversation entirely in acronyms? Because I can. No, but we have a lot of organizations that work really hard to make it digestible in different languages as well. So the Federation for Children with Special Needs is our statewide parent training and information center. They have wonderful basic rights workshops in a multitude of languages to help break it down, to really simplify it. And they also have support. You can call and ask for help understanding things. And you can also ask during your meeting, because I know that our coordinators and our special education leaders are happy to slow down and explain. It takes someone saying, I don't know, and be it's an issue. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abe, Amanda, Kara. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next presentation is an assessment update. And I'll point out just briefly here, you'll see on the agenda that there's a sub-item here that says this is in regards to goal number 4 around equitable opportunities. So some of the feedback from last week's conversation was to make it easier and more obvious when we're getting presentations that relate to both district and superintendent goals. So you'll start to see these on the agenda items. And that was really just my way of vamping while we got the presentation ready.
Yeah, it was on the agenda, it was on the cover page, and I think Deb is even going to mention it too. So happy to, if you have other ways that you want us to telegraph it too, we're happy to make adjustments. I have a hat too that I can wear with what goal we're talking about.
Have a little ticker across
At
the
any
top.
moment, yeah.
Well, we'll all cheer goal at appropriate moments.
All right. Hi. All right. Good evening. First, want to thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about assessment tonight. This is policy IL, and it was drafted last year by the policy subcommittee and approved by the school committee last year. And for as many years as I can remember, I'm sorry, louder. I'll get my teacher voice. For as many years as I can remember, better? Okay. The only student assessment data that was shared with all of you and with the community was MCAS data. And as you'll see in the next few slides, MCAS is an accountability measure. And because of that, and in this way, data is often seen as a negative. My hope, my goal, is that in our district, we can really own our own internal data and really flip that narrative to one that really helps all of us, our teams of educators, specialists, coaches, coordinators, and building leaders, to help us better understand how to support our students' needs. So it's really beginning to think about data in a different way. This is district goal number 4, as it currently is. And in the draft of our district goals, this goal number 4 articulates the different screening assessments we plan to use and how they'll be used in the future. So I just wanted to call your attention back that this is deeply connected to our district goals. So a little bit about, oh, that's much better. Thank you. Okay, so first just a little bit about MCAT.
It's okay, keep going, I'll fix it.
So the purpose of MCAS is system monitoring, as well as NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Practice, which we often have to do in a few of our schools from the federal government. But how we use MCAS is, this year is really important because DESE has strongly encouraged our districts, in all districts, to focus on using the results for improvement at the local level and to be really cautious when making any comparisons between districts and even across schools within a district because of all of the unique circumstances last year. There's even, let's see. So when we're talking about universal screening and progress monitoring tools, there's really a sweet spot with data. And one of the things that we really need to think about in the district is what's the robust data that we need, data that really gives us information that helps us identify potentially what our students' prerequisite skills and learning they need to do, but not so much data that we can't utilize it, right? We can really have data overload, and that can actually stifle some of the progress. So as our primary screening tool, along with this different areas in which domains in which and Dibbles and Early Bird and RAN class assessments, these universal screening tools, really take a snapshot of what students' strengths are and where there may be some needs that would vary in time and intensity and duration. And just like a hearing or a vision screener, universal screeners for academics are designed to catch concerns early so you can do something about them. So at the classroom level, universal screener is not the end all. It's a beginning point to have a discussion about some students who may need different or additional instruction. Low scores on a universal screener can be considered a red flag, indicating it might be beneficial to look more closely at the student's skills and progress. So they should also be used in concert with other kinds of classroom and curriculum-based measures, such as from our program's foundations or IM, as well as student work samples. So it's not only a screening tool, it's a tool in concert with other kinds of measures. So we first want to take a look at our MCAS data. And one of the things that DESE did advise is that we could compare 2021 data to 2019 data. It is generally reliable in the sense that the state offered the same number of session 1 and session 2
throughout the state. So there's sufficient data to make some reasonable inferences and do some comparisons. And so if we look at 2019 to 2021, the delta for ELA is between 0 and 5 for grades 3 through 8, as well as for grade 10. And I wanted to also point out in grade 10 that while the total for meeting and expectations and exceeding is the same at 89, they really did improve in terms of exceeding expectations. You'll see that went from 25% to 44%. That was during the pandemic. So hats off to our ELA department at the high school. The aggregate for the math department, the math for grades 3 through 8, we really did follow the state trend in the terms that our math achievement is lower than ELA. That was across the entire state. You'll see the delta is greater in math between 1 and 8 as compared to 0 and 5 in ELA. But still, considering this was during the pandemic, the delta is not as great as I think I expected or anyone expected, given everything that we dealt with last year. So this year, the state ended up calculating student growth percentile in a very different way. In previous years, they've used what's called a cohort model, which is when they look at students with a similar score within a cohort and compare from year to year. This year, they did what's called a historical academic peer, so they went back and took a look at some historical data, and that's going to be a new baseline going forward. Really can't compare anything before that. And so the new state mean student growth percentile is 30. It used to be 50. So that's where the state average is right now, 30, but the benchmarks didn't change. So 40 to 60 is still considered moderate growth. Anything higher than that, and 60 is high growth, and anything below 40 is considered low growth.
Can I just pause you there and see, does everyone understand what she was just talking about? So, in other words, the state has always categorized growth in 3 categories. High growth, which is 40 to 60% growth in a year. Moderate growth, which is, no, excuse me, I'm sorry, high growth is 60 or above. Moderate growth is 40 to 60%, and low growth is below 40%. On a typical year, growth is about the 50 percentile. That's across the state, and that's the mean. Last year, the mean growth across the state was 30% for students. So the benchmarks didn't change, but the state average certainly came way down in terms of growth. So what you're looking at, if you're looking from a state average, that would typically be 30% was the state average.
2% last year in 2021. Grade 10 is a little bit more, from 2 to 10 is the delta for science, technology, and engineering. And you'll remember there was no grade 10 STE assessment for MCAS. Students can just pass a science class to reach that competency determination. So if I shift to iReady, so let me explain a little bit first of what this slide entails. So this is iReady reading report scores for grades 1 through 8. 2,998 students were assessed this fall. The dark green hash mark is for students who are mid to above grade level. The green is early on grade level. The yellow, according to their designations, is 1 grade below level. Red is 2 grades below, and the hash marks for red, 3 or more grades below. However, at the first assessment in the year, the yellow designates where students would be performing who've just begun that academic year. So considering this is the beginning of the year, we're looking at anything from yellow, green, and hash mark green within the grade or above the grade. If this was May, this would be a completely different graph, and I'd be explaining it in a completely different way. But that's what the designations mean at this point during the school year. So some of the domains that require some further attention, as you can see from this, are vocabulary and comprehension. So I want to point that out as we go further. But overall, our students, we had 47%. You can see 21, 26, 7, and 4% overall for grades 1 through 8. If we break it down by grade, you can see really the focus on early literacy and why that's important, which is exactly what we're doing. We're focusing on that and are incredibly appreciative of the work of all of our specialists and coaches, coordinators, speech and language pathologists, and English language educators. This is really important work that they're doing around literacy this year. So we want to provide just an example, and it's actually not with iReady assessment data, it's with DIBELS, which is another quick assessment that's happening around literacy in the schools. But I was in one of the elementary schools the other day, and 14 students within one class had scored what's called in the red in DIBELS. And one of the things that we need to think about is, well, is that because there is a concern there, or is that because students haven't had instruction? And so the coach working with the specialist, working with the classroom teacher, together as a collaborative team came up with a 3-week plan for them to be in the classroom and teaching students the skill that was assessed. And what's really important and exciting to hear is that the beginning progress the students are beginning to make. And so this idea that there's something wrong, it may actually just be that our students were lacking some instruction. So that's why these screening tools are so very important going forward. So iReady for math, if we take a look at the math scores, the same thing. Again, that yellow section is at the beginning of the year, students who are on grade level, but just at the very beginning of the academic year. And again, here the domains that are requiring some further attention are numbers and operation and geometry. And again, if we break that down by grade level, you'll see again the need for us to focus on the early grades. Our coordinators, our math coordinator specialists and coaches, again, are working in educator teams within the schools with building leaders and using the results of iReady. But again, it's really important to remember that it's a screening tool. We really need to use these in concert along with assessing math concepts, which is another assessment tool that we have, our program assessments with illustrative math. Looking at student work is really important, really to make sure that we're honing in on the prerequisite skills that students need in order to access the grade level content. This slide actually takes you to see what an educator can see at the student level data. So you'll see that this is a student score, and the score was 430, so they do a numeric conversion. And then what they do is they show us what typical growth would look like for the student within the year and what a stretch growth goal would look like. And this is important for us when we're thinking about progress monitoring and looking at each student to see the progress that they make throughout the year. What's nice is that it also breaks it down on the right side to see within each of those domains where the students scored. And so, for example, this student for geometry was mid-second grade, early second grade for algebra and algebraic thinking and for measurement and data. And the numbers and operation, again, one grade below, but this is the beginning of the year, so they're just at the very beginning of second grade. So we can actually not only follow their overall progress and growth, but within each of those domains, we can look to see how the student's progressing. But one of the things that's really important, again, around a screening tool, this screening tool doesn't tell us which problems the student got wrong. It just tells us which domains. So it does provide some next steps. It does actually share with us some can-dos, next steps. But what's really important is for us to dig a little deeper, and that's the whole idea of the screening tool. So again, was it some missed instruction? Was it the student may just need a little bit more practice? Maybe there is some conceptual misunderstanding, and we have other assessment tools that we can use to help us figure that out. It could be the student didn't have a good day that day, but we have student work that actually shows that the student has that conceptual understanding. So again, using it in concert with our other tools is really, really important. When I took a look at both MCAS results and iReady, which was really striking to me, was that the same areas for ELA were prevalent in both MCAS and iReady, except for the MCAS for the writing piece, which was identifying writer's craft we need to work on, as well as for math, both geometry and numbers and operations. Stats and probability, though, for grades 6 through 7 also popped for MCAS. So those are the areas and domains within each of those subject areas if we need to, pay some extra attention. So we are following DESI's guidance this year, and they have really produced some wonderful instructional documents. I will do a shout out to DESI this year. So if there's a concern in a domain or in a subject, their suggestion is to allocate additional resources like professional learning, coaching, and specialists, and really focus on the data review cycles and that progress monitoring piece I talked about earlier. And so what does that look like for us? Well, thanks to all of you, last few years, we hired 5 math specialists and 2 literacy coaches, as well as 3 STEAM coaches. So those folks are working in the schools. We've formed instructional leadership teams at each of the elementary schools. So they are working differently right now than our child study or student support teams. They're the group who's really getting versed in looking at the data and coming together with some plans to help support teachers in the classroom setting. We're also, some of the professional learning I want to highlight, we as district leaders, and that's all program directors, Jen, Dawn, all of our principals, assistant principals, of our coordinators, our special ed coordinators, reading specialists, literacy coaches, I think who else. We are all taking a 2-year course with Melissa Orkin to help us better understand reading proficiency, including students with dyslexia. It involves coursework for us for learning, but also team-based walkthroughs through the building so that she's coaching us in that work so that we can actually see the instruction and see the impact and what's happening for students and then have those conversations together. So as we have coaches in the schools working with our teachers, as the years go on. The other piece I want to highlight is the student-centered coaching. So again, supporting our folks who are doing the coaching. All of our coaches together in a cohort are taking a course with Diane Sweeney, who is the author of Student-Centered Coaching. The other piece I wanted to look at the data was through the demographic subgroup lens, and that is the data sheet that came along with your packet. So all of the demographic data we were able to merge with iReady. So we now have demographic subgroup data for both MCAS and iReady. So the document you have actually breaks down all of the data by subgroups. And so the subgroups with the low rates of MCAS grades 3 through 8, so the meets or exceeds expectations, and combined with the iReady grades 1 through 8, beginning to above grade level for ELA and math, include the subgroups you see there. Grade 10 is only the ones that are highlighted. So the subgroups economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, African American, Black, English learners, SGP, the aggregate SGP for from 38 to 45, and that's probably one of the smallest ranges we've ever had, subgroups to the aggregate. The same is true for math with 53, and the range was 49 to 57. A little bit bigger, but still much smaller than in previous years in terms of student growth. So again, following DESI's guidance, if students in a particular demographic group have relatively low rates of meets or exceeds expectations, then we should focus on a sense of belonging and priority actions and resources. And we should set specific goals for students groups during the data review cycles and progress monitoring. Historically underrepresented groups. And so again, I want to highlight just a few of the things that we're working on. At the beginning of the year, our principals, our elementary principals, had Chris Belance come in and work with our educators around student dysregulation and starting the school year right. So again, thinking about our students' social emotional wellness and their inclusion into the school and making a good transition. We are bringing in Elise Wolf, and she's going to be working on enhancing inclusion practices, including what's called a pair model. And I want to shout out to Jen Treslow for bringing Elise Wolf to our attention and the work that she does. Our junior high and our high school are working with communities for restorative justice around community building, circles implementation, and coaching. And two of our own, our ELE chair, Marianne, and Lannon, our speech and language pathologist chair, are providing a workshop for our educators around how to support our students' strengths and understand their differences, our Brazilian Portuguese, Hindi, Chinese, Spanish, Tamil, and Telugu families. And so I want to make sure that I highlight some of the things that we're doing around strengthening climate and culture. And lastly, I just want to leave you with a snapshot of what our dashboard is beginning to look like, and a shout out to Andrew Shen for all of his work behind the scenes to bring this. We're also looking to see some other tools that we might be able to one place and make them usable at each of the elementary schools. But we're also looking at other platforms and tools that capture sort of other kinds of evidence of student learning. We also know that presentations and projects and writing samples and performances and artwork, all of those things are important when we're capturing what a full picture of a child is all about. And so not everything is quantifiable, and we do want to make sure that we have other ways to capture that information. And of course, all of that is aligned with Universal Design for Learning and all the ways that our students can express their learning. So thank you, and I just want to end with a real deep appreciation and expression of gratitude to all of our educators for everything they did last year and everything they continue to do this year, particularly centering their work and focus on our students. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Deb. Tessa?
You didn't expect me not to comment, did you? Okay, so I'll begin with the compliment, which is I have deep appreciation for all of the screening and assessment and everything that's going on at the lower grades. And I think that you and I have had extensive conversations about that. So, can't believe I'm going to say this, John, but aggregated data means nothing until you look at the disaggregated data, which you did provide us. And it's sort of nauseating when you look at the grade 10 ELA and math, because ordinarily I would say, MCAS, who cares, except they have to pass that. And all of the kids who are not passing it are part of the subgroups that you listed. So less than half of students with disabilities met or exceeded expectations. And I think that coming off of listening to a presentation from the SEPAC, I think that society, students with disabilities are less capable, when by the time you get to high school, most of the kids with disabilities have already been remediated. So we're talking about kids who may be actually brilliant, but have social emotional needs, or maybe are dyslexic or anything else, and yet they're the ones that aren't passing. And so what are we doing in the model of a learning center, even in high school? I mean, that's like, and we're talking probably about very bright kids. So
this is probably one of the largest percentages of students, grade 10, we've ever had not pass on the first chance. Usually it's about 3 to 4 students per year. So what we've had, they have this of students. I know because I pay for the tutoring for the high school for that to happen. But it is something for us to be concerned about this year and to really pay attention going forward, because, again, I think some of the learning that did or didn't happen last year was actually impacted here, and that could have repercussions the next couple of years.
So I have to agree with Tessa that this data is really deplorable for our district. And I appreciate that we're sharing the data, and we need to know the problem. Data is always important, but there's a story behind the data that I don't think I'm getting. I know I would have. We found this is what the problem is. These are the problems that we found that are causing. I look at this data and I'm looking at economically disadvantaged kids, students with disability, English learners, African American kids, Latino kids, and it's disturbing. disabilities, I don't know how to help them. I don't know, I would have wanted to hear these are the be disrespectful. I do appreciate the data is telling a story, but I think the more why is it not kids that do not have disabilities? So what are those doing? What resources are these kids not getting that we as a school committee can help to provide that or advocate for that so that these kids can meet the standards?
So I think back to Peter's earlier statement, it's actually one of the very reasons why we're instituting the MTSS model, because as you know, there's a high subgroup called high needs, which are students who fall into 3 different categories, one of 3 different categories, EL, special ed, or economically disadvantaged. And so oftentimes, that's not just one, it's more than one. And I think, again, back to the belief systems, back to the biases, and not having any other kinds of supports in place. When students are pulled out of classrooms, they're missing the gen ed classroom. They're missing the universal instruction. And so what ends up happening is it gets further and further behind, and the gap gets larger. And so one of the things that we've also done this year is to so that students won't have an additional practice time. So we're not continuing to broaden that gap between, especially at grade level learners. Doing quicker intervention is what the whole MTSS piece is. I also want to just go back, Tessa, just real quickly, just because students, they may have passed without meeting or exceeding. So I think the pass rate of MCAS is different than
in how that appears, not eliminate. But I think systems where teams of teachers are able to their gap or, you know, a 3-time-a-year assessment or a once-a-year assessment that's more of an autopsy than anything that's useful. So I think it's really, you know, we can't say strongly enough how important having an MTSS process in place at every school is to addressing these disparities. That is the primary. We're just getting going, and that's not going to be an instant thing.
And, you know, felt what Evelyn and others felt. I also felt strongly motivated. And you've identified various interventions that you've undertaken. And so the question is, or maybe Peter would prefer I say when.
So I think I want to go back to my very first statement, and that is that we own the data. This is our data. We need to pay attention to it. We need to own it. We need to do something about it. And alluding to what Peter said earlier, MCAS is like an afterthought, because have is actionable. And so what will look different and feel different is in the collaboratively looking at this and saying, what do we do next? How do we progress monitor this? What interventions have we tried? What else can we do? And making sure that we have the best resources to support that work that they're doing. So eventually what will be different is that all of those will be, if not the same as the aggregate, higher than the aggregate. That would be my goal. But that's, when I started this presentation, my hope, my goal is that we are not averse to looking at the data, because the data The data is neutral. It's telling us we need to pay attention to it. It's what we do with it and how we own it.
You know, I think what you're really asking for is what's our theory of action around this, right? Our theory of action essentially around MTSS system is if we have a robust MTSS system in place at every school that implements high quality instruction with fidelity, implements assessments with fidelity, and has progress monitoring systems in place, then we're going to greatly reduce the disparities we have among the different subgroups. I mean, that's really what the theory of action is there for. And we're going to be able to meet each individual student's needs at a higher level because we'll have more responsive systems in place. So, I think, that is the crux of what we're trying to do right now at the elementary level, and is the focus of everything. I think, there's an intersection here of MTSS, the work around culturally responsive practices, continuing to expand the diversity of our workforce, because we know that particularly students of color, if they have at least one teacher of color, that absolutely increases their outcomes. And in addition, I think it also intersects with the anti-bias training that we're trying to do and we require of all of our staff. So, we can never pinpoint that there's one strategy. One of the tenets of culturally responsive practice is having an MTSS process in place. So, to talk to it, this data was a long time coming. To be honest, when Adam and I talked and Deb and I talked, we could have presented all of the data on slides, but we would have had a 40-slide presentation and a 75-minute presentation. We wanted to instead present it to the committee and let you ask the questions and then be able to initiate this discussion. But this was the discussion we hope to have.
I think this is really helpful, and I really appreciate the way that you presented the data from iReady, just especially looking at the way that the data can be broken down compared to the MCAS results, which is what we've always seen in years past. It's really helpful. I know that using iReady in the classroom 3 times a year is a really big time investment for the teachers and for the students. And so it's helpful for me to be able to look at it in this detail and see how much how much information the data provides. It's not just passing or failing, but even broken down into the specific areas. There's one place where I'm wondering if in the future when you present it, if there could be a little bit more information, and that is, it's like I'm looking at page 10, for example, just as one example of it. And it looks like if you look at the bright green area, that 117 students in that range, and then you have sort of and 1,000 plus above that, and the 1,000 plus there's out the year above grade level, we can have a better idea of where we're starting out. Really rapid decline back to the middle. So I'm always, and kind of along the same lines, sorry, I know you haven't answered. On page 14, when you showed the example of student above stretch for their individual.
So to be able to show that big range here past the year, if we're looking at it. We absolutely can follow for students no matter where they start. Very, very specifically at the student level.
Can I jump in? And I'm trying to remember back to our presentation last year, and when I looked at this, the categories shift as the year goes on.
a 5-point system. It stays the same. Different time of the means.
Okay.
A question board available for the community to see just for internal use.
Yeah, so it'll be for internal use, and right now we're just building it. It's very, very basic. We have just included the iReady and MCAS to be able to pull that data in. We're looking to see the DIBBLs to be able to do that digitally, so that too can be uploaded and part of this. You know, one of the things we want to make sure we're doing also is not asking our teachers to do data entry on top of everything else that they're doing right now. So if it's something that can be pulled in pretty quickly. But this is being done sort of behind the scenes with some, what do you call that? Script or code behind, yeah, to be able to pull this together. There are other, I think Panorama is another one that we're looking at. There are different other resources out there, so we want to make sure that we're using something that's accessible also to those instructional leadership teams that teachers can use at the teacher level, that school principals can use, and then that we can use at the district level to see how schools and monitor that from lots of different levels. But right now it's in its, I would say it's in its infancy stage. That is something we're trying to build out.
Thanks. All right, we are a little behind. If anybody has any last pressing questions for Deb, I will let you go. Yeah, sure.
I won't talk the whole rest of the meeting if you don't want. Anyway, I was just going to say that the iReady data for 1 through 8 reflects exactly the same sort of things that are happening in 10th grade. So like, believe me, I'm like MTSS, like 70% of 1 grade level or below, whereas only 23% of Asians were 1 grade level or below. Like, I think we have to take like a really serious look about what is happening in teaching in class, because I mean, those are like flip-flopped. I mean, that's crazy. And it's consistent. I mean, that's grades 1 through 8. And I'm sure if you disaggregate it, there's, you know, it may be more.
No matter what kind of training you give people, what kind of interventions we put in place, if we don't disabuse the minds about disabilities and kids of color, we will not make any interventions. These will work.
Requirement of all of our educators in the first 3 years that they are within our district. And our hope is to provide even greater support in that area by having some school-based seed leaders to help the principal lead that work in the schools with their instructional leadership teams, because it's not enough just to take a class or to take a course. It needs to be ongoing work, and it needs to be part of the structure of the school. So I couldn't agree with you more.
All right, thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you, Deb.
All right, we're moving on to the district goals. This is our second read of the district goals. Peter, do you have a quick update or any feedback you want to give to the committee?
No, I'll just, in the packet, you saw, you know, the revised district goals. I tried to take as much feedback as possible from the committee and incorporate that into the goals. I also don't know how I missed it at first, but I added our core values. I thought that was kind of important on the front of it. But you know, just to walk you through a little bit of the feedback, goal number 1 in particular had quite a bit of feedback, and I think what we wanted to do was really recognize that students returning, you know, had a variety of experiences, and thinking about, you know, the core tenet of a trauma-informed approach. And so we tried to incorporate that. And I think actually Amanda spoke to this last time, thinking about making sure that we listened to feedback from families continuously. So we actually incorporated that as one of the outcomes. And it's not that and kind of front and center for that. I'm trying to think of other major. You know, we had asked you to prioritize these before, just knowing the time of the year. That didn't seem like we came up with a really clear consensus out of that. So we're just gonna, you know, different people had different priorities, which made sense based on everyone's own experiences. We're gonna leave all 6 goals and see what we get out of it. I will be honest with you. If we feel like we're tapping our educators out, I'm just gonna pull back, but I'm okay that I may not meet a goal, knowing that we just can't, you know, send our educators spinning as we go through the year. So, but we're going to try and go for 6, stay accountable to those, keep things moving forward, and that's really where we ended. But I'm happy to take any other feedback on that.
If there isn't any other feedback, I'll take a motion to approve the district goals as presented.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. The motion I would like to make is oh, sorry.
Ouch. Wait a second. I believe it's the chair's discretion to choose who gets to speak. So I'll let Ben make the motion, and I will gladly accept your second and a comment during your acceptance.
So I'd like to make a motion to accept the stated goals as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, that was Amy. Is there discussion?
I'd like to make an amendment.
Please, John.
So I would like to add the words, and request that the goals for FY23 be presented to the school committee no later than August 2022.
So in the amendment, we have to either have a second, or I believe the original motioner has to accept.
Can I offer a comment on the
I would welcome a comment, yes.
So if you looked at the updated information, last meeting you requested kind of what a 2-year process might look like. And there was actually some commentary about how can we incorporate school committee into that goal setting process. I actually think we addressed much of that. The only hesitancy I had to committing to a specific timeline at the time was I really need to be able to talk with school principals about it, because if we're aligning school and district improvement plans and goals, we need to make sure that we don't do anything at the district level that doesn't allow them to have school-wide goals. But I actually don't know as though I see it's going to be an issue to present goals. In all honesty, much of the work that we're doing toward the goals has already been underway since July, so I think we generally have a pretty good sense of it.
I actually want to make a comment in that I think that we're proposing in our next agenda items enough of a change to the way that we operate normally that to ask the administration to change the way they've typically presented goals in the past 3 years, in addition to changing sort of the evaluation cycle and all that, seems like a lot of change without the opportunity to evaluate some of the change in isolation to know if it's worthwhile. And I'm also cognizant of the fact that Peter asked us for a limited set of goals, and we gave him all of the goals back, and he's got concern that that's a lot for the district. And so to then on top of that say, oh, and by the way, we want to speed up your process for setting goals for next year, I think it's a lot to ask. So I would prefer to keep Ben's original motion that says we approve these goals as presented, and then continue to have a discussion about this as we talk about the superintendent's evaluation cycle at our next item. John.
So first of all, if Ben's not going to accept and there is no second, then the amendment fails. So just to be clear, does anybody want to second that? No. Okay. So then let me discuss the motion and why this, this timing, in my view, is so problematic. We sit halfway between the first day of school and Christmas right now. And as Peter just said, and as you can all realize from the presentation, these goals have been acted upon and have been the basis of the start of the school year. So things are going on. And so the leverage that the school committee has to come in at this moment in time and say, oh, we have a different idea, or we priority setting process, you know, it's really limited. This is the classic case of not recognizing the time at which there is leverage to have a real discussion and potentially wind up in a different place, as opposed to being presented with, do you want to do this thing that we're already doing, or do you really want to do something else? It's not really a choice. And so this calendar that we have worked through to many years, so this is not obviously the first time, is just flawed, and it needs to change.
Thank you, John. Any other discussion?
I actually agree with you. I actually think that that's correct, especially because we just saw in this last presentation significant data that was so disturbing to us. We could have had an opportunity to perhaps be part of a process to help steer this course a little bit, to add some urgency, to deal with the numbers we just named as disturbing to us. And because we are waiting until now the end of October to say yes, and we're not changing the process to maybe steer the ship a little bit differently next year, we're setting ourselves up for the same spinning of wheels. So I wish I had seconded your motion. I actually think we should more deeply consider this.
He didn't withdraw it. You could still second it.
Great,
and we
I
could.
second that motion.
All right, so the motion has been seconded. John?
Just because the exact language matters, I just want to make sure everybody understood that what I'm proposing is that we add the language and request that the goals for FY23 be presented to the school committee no later than August 2022. So the language is we request, not we require. I just want to make sure that people understand that.
Amy?
I was going to ask for a little bit more clarity. We're asking that we're requesting the goals are given to the school committee by the end of August or by the beginning of August?
That would be the end, if it said by August.
By August, okay, well,
When we have our meeting. I assume that's what you meant, right?
I think we should, I just wanted a little bit more clarity.
Hold on just a second, everyone. So John, would you like to amend your amendment to be more precise in terms of when in August?
So if people would like it to read no later than the 31st of August, I'm fine with that, and I see Kira nodding your head, so I still.
Now, which is ridiculous because all these kids have already been placed in classes and, all these things. It's a measurement of progress, really, I guess, more than anything. But when we look at the iReady data, that's something different, right? So I agree with John.
I agree, but I do want to hear from Peter and the administration, how feasible is this? I know John is not requiring it. Is it because I guess there's value in us getting the goals earlier on in the school year to be able to help direct the ship a little bit, or make some improvements. How feasible is it that we can get the goals by August without putting too much pressure on the administration to get it to us?
To be honest, I think what I've been hoping to do, and I know John and I went back and forth on email, I think we actually need to look at the timeline for the whole goal-setting process more carefully, because one of the things that has struck me since I came here, in the first several years I was here, we always had district goals, but they had nothing to do with what was going on in schools. And schools' goals had nothing to do with what was happening at the district level. They were independent of each other. And so the district goals came out in, October. The school goals, school improvement plans were formulated in April and May and finalized in June originally. But I don't know how those two could ever be linked together. If the district goals are set 3 months after school goals, it doesn't make sense. I actually think we probably want to adjust if we want school improvement plans due in June, and not in August. You know, otherwise, that's not reasonable alignment. So, you know, I would want to just look at district goal setting independent of kind of the whole calendar. What I would prefer to do is work with the leadership team this fall and winter and come back to you with kind of an overall timeline of how I think goal setting should be working. But I understand the intent. I absolutely agree with the intent of it. The concern I have is that it's setting one arbitrary benchmark independent of the whole process.
I think my concern is to get us the half step, a line that we need. That may not happen this year, particularly if we don't want to put undue pressure on our building level leaders to get their schedule sort of lined up with ours, or our central leaders to get their schedule lined up with the school leaders. So John, I do agree with you. I think it would make a lot of sense. I think it would be really helpful. I'm just worried about doing that this year in this cycle. Ben, did you have a comment?
No, I was agreeing.
Tessa.
I wonder if there's some in between where maybe goals aren't presented by August, but we start our process, at least in the interim, until Peter redoes the goal setting cycle, maybe for, especially if we decided on a 2-year evaluation cycle, that maybe there's somewhere in between where in that August business meeting, we begin the discussion of, you know, maybe that's just sharing what district leaders have been talking about. Maybe it's not, you know, maybe it's just something like asking school committee at this point in time, what are your priorities, so that there maybe, it's feeling like we have a little bit more input into.
So that's in fact what we put in the 2-year superintendent evaluation cycle, was that in our July workshop time, we would begin the discussion with the administration about feedback from the previous year's work and inform goals to then go into the August district leadership retreat to then circle back with the building leaders to sort of close that loop and then come back to us end of August or early September. I think we all agree we've got to get the schedule aligned. And, you know, we had thought about that, Tessa, around bringing feedback from the committee in earlier and throughout that process that the goals are being created. But then there's the formal presentation of the goals to the committee, which happens a little bit later. John, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so I mean, but we're actually being asked right now to approve the goals. And so that's, I think, where I'm a little bit hung up, that somehow I want all of us on board, and by all of us, I really do mean all of us, the school committee, the administration, and the staff, so that at the start of the school year, everybody says, this is our remit for this year. And to be sitting here in October and say that we're not going to try and do that for next year, that we're going to have a rough, you know, ragged, you know, rush across the starting line doesn't feel right to me. And it feels to me like we can try and do that. So I'm not agonized about any of the details and how exactly Peter does it. And everybody who has been through goal setting processes know you can do top-down stuff and bottom-up stuff, and you can try and rationalize them in different ways. Because of the nature of the school committee, there is sort of an inherent top-down piece of it that makes sense. And, you know, likewise, there's an operational piece, you know, like the interventions that we were looking at. It really is not, we want to know if the interventions work, but it's really not our job to figure out whether those are the right interventions. We need to be aware of them, but not determining them. So I do actually see some opportunities. So for some parallel discussion at the top level of what are our goals and objectives, while at the same time, you know, the process of interventions, so that, again, by the end of the summer, we've reached a point that says, okay, this is what we're going to try and do this year.
Because that's the opportunity before schools are writing school improvement plans to be able to get into that. And because if we, and it might have, schools are going to need time to work with schools to be able to write first. They're never going to be able to take that feedback. So I think probably overall what has to happen not identifying priorities beyond the strategic plan, because that would be challenging, I think. But determine the priority areas early. Let us work on district goals. I actually don't see August as a challenging timeline. I think the priority areas. So that's what I think. We can make that timeline to adjust. You know, we'll make that timeline to adjust, but I think that
Second, I'm looking at Beth. Original to vote on it. So think about that for a second.
I just have a very specific comments about the goal 6. We will collect the use about the collecting, engage the student in the feedback loops about the classroom, teachers. Like, in the university, all the students are going to have this kind of practice.
Marie. How teachers.
Sure. And then has a conversation about that with their evaluator.
Okay, thank you. So I'll look to Ben and Amy first and see if you want to accept the motion.
Hesitant to accept it. I'm hesitant to put a hard stop. The goal. This is the right place to do it. It feels more like it should be attendance, a super, as we look at what we want what we expect him to do is to prove it, to make those changes to the timeline. So that's all, those are my thoughts. So if
Thank you.
If the general consensus is, you know, I'll go with it.
The drop dead date for August. Here. It literally.
Again, I think just said twice that he.
Okay, so original motioners, or we have an amendment, I'm sorry, it's been seconded. The two original motioners do not want to approve it, but because the motion's been, we're going to accept the amendment to the original motion. Everybody all caught up? Great. So all in favor of accepting the motion, please say aye. Sorry, accepting the amendment, thank you. Please say aye. Aye. All opposed? All abstentions. All right, so that would be a unanimous acceptance of the amendment to the motion, and now we're going to vote on the motion. I feel like I'm the town moderator asking if we're ready to vote, and we're voting on voting. Yes, Beth. So
the complete motion.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. The complete motion is, I move that the Acton Boxborough Regional School Committee July 23, 31st August 2020.
Going to vote on that motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Rules of orders this evening. We did, in my memo, I was really appreciative of the discussion. The largest of which was for the administration to come back with a proposal is what's in your packet from
Include kind of, someone had asked kind of like on a monthly timeline, what would that look like? And I was able to give a little bit of indicators on the superintendent rubric that best align with those. Some of them weren't perfect, but they were close. And I tried to pick the ones that made the most sense for you. And I also tried to pick standards and indicators across all 4 of the main standards so that from an evaluative point, there was something for each of the.
Thanks, Peter. And like I mentioned before, we're also trying our that do speak to the goals. So you'll start to see that hopefully in the agendas. It should make it easier to then just pull the agendas.
Make a motion?
Please.
I move to set the evaluation cycle for Superintendent Peter Light to 2 years with by a.
Thank you. All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. There is a point of discussion, I believe, John?
Yeah, the language with the option to return, it's inherent that what the committee can do, the committee can undo. So I think my friendly suggestion is that we would drop the language starting from with the option.
So are you making an amendment to the motion?
No, I'm simply, saying I'm offering a friendly amendment. If the friendly amendment is rejected, we will move on.
So the friendly amendment has been rejected, so we're going to move on. Any further discussion to the vote? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you. Next item is the update on the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, funding.
Would you like to, you've done a lot of work on this, so would you like to do the grand honors?
Yeah, sure. I'm delighted to share with this committee that the Acton Select Board made their vote on the various petitions for the ARPA allocation, and the school district was given a $2 million pool of money from that allocation for us to use as prioritized. Will be over 3 years. The first $1 million comes in the first year, and then it's $500,000 for the other 2 of the 3 years. So thank you so much to the Acton Select Board for accepting our request and allocating us that money so that we can continue our efforts to educate Acton and Boxborough's children.
Thank you, Kara, and I look forward to an equally positive outcome from the town of Boxborough as well. John?
A question. Did the Select Board allocate the entire $7 million?
That's a great question. That is a great question, and for the record, I don't get me to lying, but I do believe that they did.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on to subcommittee and member reports. The first is an update from the building committee. So the building committee did meet last Wednesday, with an update on the building project. As I'm sure of those of you who've walked by the site, lots of progress is being made. There's a big push right now to basically get the building dry fit or dried in for the winter season. And we're very close to getting electricity the final electricity brought to the building as well. The contractors are doing a great job, as I'm sure many of you have heard on the news, with supply chain challenges and shortages. The contractors are doing a great job of bringing in and expediting materials and doing their best to order in advance materials that they're going to need and store them on site so that we don't have too many challenges in that regard. We did have a couple of building tours last week, and so I was able to walk through the facility. The second floor, which is the Gates School, is the one that's sort of most progressed along. The site is absolutely amazing. The views that these students are going to have of the wetlands from many of their classrooms is phenomenal. The space that they're going to have in these new buildings is great. I had the opportunity to run into the director of the Carol Hubner preschool program. He told me that he has never picked more furniture. Is that they are now into the furniture and technology selection period. And so there's a lot of decisions, I think. Marie, you were in several of those meetings, consuming a great deal of your time, so thank you for that. And I was also speaking with one of the teachers in the pre-K program who's here in this building, and she is just so thrilled with the facility that she's going to have to be able to move from this space here to a brand new space. We do have a vote to take, but before we go to that, Peter, is there anything else you want to share around the building update?
No, I just want to thank Marie, because when we started the furniture process, we knew that that was going to be extraordinarily involved, and she stood right up and said, pick me. Kind of that on with a lot of grace, so thank you very much, Marie. It's ongoing. We are right now getting all of the ideas from staff out. There is more to come on that, though, because for every room in that building, we have to now price it. And then we have to compare it to the actual budget. And then we, I'm sure, are going to have to actually make some hard decisions around what we can afford, what we can't, you know, and then kind of go through that process. But we really have to have the furniture out to bid probably no later than January. Because of the supply chain challenges, if we don't have them out to bid by January, we really run a risk of not having things in, is what we're hearing from the architect and the consultant. So just, you know, it's a really fast process. We all wish that we had months and months and months, but if we don't have, and we are leaving for coordinating.
Thank you, Marie. I will add that if there are any members of this committee that do wish to take a tour of the school building project, please send me an email, and we can, you know, the contractors are absolutely amazing. Both our owner's project manager, Skanska, and Consigli, our general contractor, are extremely accommodating. So if there's a group here that would like to go see the building, do send me a note, and we'll see if we can arrange a tour for the school committee. And then, and the last order of business around the school building update is that we need to vote a revised membership to that building committee. Maria Nealon has joined the Boxborough FinCom, and as such, she's going to step down from the Acton Boxborough Regional School Building Committee. So I will accept a motion to approve the retirement of Maria Nealon from the ABRSC School Building Committee.
So moved.
That has been moved and seconded by John, and Amy added her gratitude. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you.
The having some meet, and we have started.
As of right now, we have about 14 responses to that. To kind of finalize that, or maybe it was the week before to finalize. Survey closes this weekend on Sunday, and then we'll be meeting again to kind of finalize committee membership, get word out. We did include in the survey for people who wanted to continue to be notified about the process, so even if someone isn't on the committee, they can stay informed. And just a reminder to the school committee, this is really a student-driven process, so the high school and junior high are actually getting the students together around this at the same time. They're going to really design the process. They are going to actually have to follow the process, get feedback from all of our different stakeholders in the community. The function of the school committee level subcommittee is to make sure that the students are planning a thorough process, to make sure that the mascot choices that they do put forward are aligned with the vision and values of the district, and then to finally forward that subcommittee recommendation to school committee. The other function of the subcommittee is going to be around community communication, so that as the students work through their process and they update the subcommittee can really take on the task of pumping out communication to the community so people are well informed of what's going on. So that's about it. I do know we have a couple of comments from public around that topic, so.
Yep, are there any questions or comments from the committee on the on the mascot screening update? No? Questions or comments from the public? Please step up to the mic and give us your name and where you're from, and then you're welcome to speak. And then just a quick reminder, the public comments are going to be limited to 3 minutes.
There you go. Thank you. Christine Marlowe, Boxborough, Massachusetts. I asked for a delay of the creation of the mascot screening committee until we can confirm that A, this was a legal process and that the committee represents this community and not a small biased group from the start. Many in the greater community feel that they were not included in the mascot retirement discussion. Why does this mascot screening committee only have one member from the greater community, the same community that pays the taxes for this school and the administration's salary? Shrewsbury included 32 participants from the public in their committee. Some of the school administrators have permitted bullying and shaming of pro-colonial students as a means to silence their voices. Many students have used accusations and intimidate pro-colonial supporters. Since the superintendent and many in the administration back them, they feel empowered to behave in this way. Superintendent Light, you should never have voiced your opinion on the chosen sides of this issue. This was a missed opportunity to demonstrate to our students what leadership, conflict resolution, and respect for differences of opinion look like. Instead, what has been demonstrated is that intolerance and bully tactics are acceptable behavior. This is shameful. This mishandling of this issue has resulted in division and contention with our student body and our community, and it really needs to stop. My family respects the colonials who fought for freedom and against oppression. We are grateful that they made it possible for legal immigrants like my great-grandparents to come here for a better life. Unfortunately, this is no longer being taught in this school. It is disgusting that the students believe that the colonials were oppressors when in fact. And for these reasons, I believe that this committee should be stalled, waited to see if it's legal, and bring in more people from the community and other areas to ensure that it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, we're going to move on to the Community Engagement Subcommittee update. Andrew.
Thanks, Adam. After consultation with the superintendent, the subcommittee set a target date of tomorrow, Friday, October 22nd, as our inaugural meeting of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. First orders of business will be around organizing a cadence of meetings, defining our objectives and goals and strategies. The committee will begin discussions of communications, content, distribution, and design strategy, and a full report of our first meeting will be available during our next school committee meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. And a legislative update from Ginny.
Thank you. So last week, staff and our two state representatives, Danila Sena and Tammy Gouvea's offices, participated in a Zoom conference with me and Peter and Dave in our ongoing efforts to honor our commitment to move to universal all-day kindergarten. I realized that, I didn't just realize this, but I thought it would be very useful if our state reps got, an explainer from Dave on the budgetary impacts in a much more detailed way than I'm capable of providing. So he did that, and he answered their questions and provided some follow-up documentation to them. Both of our state reps have indicated their willingness to try to find a way to give us some state assistance as we try to move towards universal all-day kindergarten and cope with the double whammy budgetary impacts of honoring that commitment of that vote that we took. And so we talked about the history. We talked about the fact that we are one of a very small handful of districts that doesn't offer it. And I've been asking since 2017 for assistance, and I feel like we have some momentum now. So that's just an update in the process, which is obviously going to be an ongoing process.
Thank you. Next item is an EDCO update. Sorry, was there a comment?
I just wanted to ask Ginny, do you know when the maps that are being proposed, if Acton is still split?
We are, yes. Which I look at as a positive thing.
Sorry, John. I'm right-handed, but I seem to favor the left side of the room.
Adam, I can't resist saying I think you go both ways.
Thanks, Peter.
All right, so EDCO. This is an important EDCO update, as they all will be from here on out. We had a board meeting this morning, and they presented us with kind of estimated closing costs at this point. As you know, just to give you a brief history if you weren't on the committee, EDCO is an educational collaborative that was formed really with two purposes. One, the original intent of EDCO was around professional development, but then it also expanded into serving students with disabilities and had student programs. Over the course of the last several years, EDCO became financially unsustainable and was ending, $1 million+ in debt every year, which resulted in additional assessments to the member districts. An educational collaborative is formed by a group of school districts who get together and choose to pay into a collaborative as a way of reducing individual costs that we might incur. So it's supposed to be a financially sustainable model, but through a variety of issues and exacerbated by the pandemic, it was not financially viable anymore and had been losing money each year. So the board of EDCO voted to initiate termination proceedings that included each member school committee for every district having to also take that vote, and that was a unanimous vote across all the districts. EDCO closed its doors for student programs and any kind of programming at the end of last year. So this year, however, the board has to continue to operate, and with the intent that all of the debts of EDCO have to be paid off by the end of this year. At that point, once the debts are paid off, DESE will give the collaborative permission to formally dissolve, and then EDCO will no longer exist. There are a number of processes that have to play out over the course of the year. The two most notable that are significant. One, just as we have retiree health insurance that we have to manage through our OPEB trust, EDCO has retirees who are committed have to file perpetuity will have access to health insurance. And so that's one. The other is that we had a 10-year lease that a board, probably 5 years ago, that was really one of the more challenging financial aspects of the collaborative, and we have to find a way. In order to solicit bids for who can take over that benefits trust. The other aspect of it, the lease, is currently under negotiation through the attorneys. I'm not going to provide details of that negotiation because in the public session was kind of a range of closing costs. So I know that, John, this will be very exciting because it's all about cost. The highest of those is based on a $2.7 million lease settlement cost. We don't know exactly where. And then they go in from the collaborative a number of years ago. However, they were original signatories to the lease. And the article, based on including those two communities, we have about a 6.71% share of the enrollment. And so that would be the percentage that our closing costs would be on. So based to close. So that is going to be an important aspect of going through this year. I have been talking to Dave, and he and I believe he's not here because he's attending a graduation ceremony for one of his daughters. But I believe his estimate was about $200,000 in additional Medicare reimbursement. So I actually think that we'll come out of this year with the EDCO at a kind of a net zero. So, you know, because it's you know, and I'm happy to take any questions, but things are progressing. We're continuing to do that work as a board. So Margaret.
I do really want to just take 1 minute to thank people who are going to show up on the district goals, but what Peter has done, you know, in the context of working through this very difficult circumstance, you know, and playing that leadership role, you know, is it just such a social good that, and the fact that there are ranges.
Move on to our consent agenda, which is no longer going to be a consent agenda because one of the two. I'll accept a motion to reauthorize the official junior high school and high school. That was moved and seconded by Kira.
Thank you for reauthorizing those. I will tell you, overwhelming sentiment from our students has been how good it is to get back to activity. Our students in terms of social emotional health. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. For fourth, that is also unanimous. Thank you. Would anybody like to read the motion that is in our packet? Tessa will. Thank you.
I move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrants as follows. In the amount of $2,783,850.41. Payroll deduction warrants as follows. Number 22-008 PR dated 10/7/2021 in the amount of $556,426.80. And vendor warrant as follows. Number 22-008A dated 10/7/2021 in the amount of $224,636.81.
John seconded that. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is unanimous. While we're on the topic of warrants, I will remind anybody who's on the warrant approving subcommittee to please check your email. We do have a set of warrants that the subcommittee needs to approve so that checks can go out. And so if you're on that subcommittee, there's an email for you to review those and send the finance department an approval of that in writing. I would ask Peter typically at this time if there was anything in the FYI that he wanted to point out, but there is no FYI items this evening. So with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Ben seconded that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?